Permaculture is a design science based on three simple ethics: care for the earth, care for people, and share the surplus. Permaculture also has core principles that guide us in creating sustainable abundance.
Ethics.
Permaculture is about designing sustainable human settlements and preserving natural systems. And because permaculture deals with more than just agriculture and stuff, there has to be some ethics.
Bill Mollison, one of the original architects of permaculture, said that there is one prime ethical directive to permaculture, and that is to take responsibility for our own existence and that of our children.
One of the central messages is that I would encourage anyone and everyone to really take responsibility for themselves. And that might sound a bit abstract, but what I mean by that is start really looking, start really observing, start with yourself. How do I feel? How do I feel now? How do I feel today? Why did I get so angry? Why did that happen? And then you can go to, when you're in the supermarket, turn over every product you buy. You will read a lot of ingredients that you won't have the slightest idea what they are. Your grandmother certainly didn't have these things in the pantry, like E149, you know.
Yeah, what is that?
No. So start taking responsibility that way, and by choosing yes or no, is this something I want? Do I want to support an industrial model of agriculture? What does it mean to support industrial agriculture? So inform yourself, and then start taking responsibility for every single aspect of your life. Am I going to buy that jacket? Do I know the health effect of polyester? Is that something I support? Do I need that new TV when the old one is still working? That's actually all encompassed in permaculture, but it boils down to really spending time to inform yourself, to observe, and then take responsibility. Because if we all did that, we would live in a very different society. Everybody is an adult that says, yes, I am here and I take responsibility.
That's why we make sure that we grow our food in the places we're living, so we reduce the ecological footprint and the food miles itself. So if I'm digging sweet potatoes from within my courtyard, what am I destroying? You know, what am I doing to the environment? How much am I polluting? You know, against if I buy bread. So if you buy bread, for example, bread in Malawi, 250, but it's not that cheap. You look at the cost of the whole environment and the cost of your pocket. You know, but people, they just look at how does this thing cost my pocket instead of thinking how does it cost the environment.
So it's really good to learn how to do simple things that will produce the things you need close by using local resources. And so that's permaculture is really good at this.
Permaculture is an ethical-based design science.
But ultimately, it boils down to a couple of things that make it different than other design systems. First off, there's ethics behind permaculture.
At the core of permaculture teaching lies three ethics: earth care, people care, and fair share.
All the ways of producing food, organizing communities, generating energy, and so on that feature in permaculture practice stem from these ethics.
While earth care and people care at their simplest forms are the concerted efforts to nurture natural environments and surrounding communities in your everyday actions, fair share is a bit less self-explanatory. The concept of fair share is essentially the synthesis of earth and people care, and acknowledges that there is one earth that we all need to live on. So surplus, whether that's food, money, or time, should be shared with those who are otherwise languishing or be returned back to the earth. These three ethics ultimately intertwine to create an effective moral base on which permaculture practitioners can build and transform their local systems. They're essentially guideposts for tangible change.
As you have no doubt realized, the three ethical principles that underpin permaculture are interlinked. By caring for the earth, we give people a more sustainable future. By caring for people, we foster a sense that we are all connected and that we must all take responsibility for our actions. And by sharing the surplus, we turn our back on destructive competition and create a more harmonious way of life.
As we work in the landscape or work with community, we try to bring it back to the ethics and make sure that we're fulfilling our ethical duties by the actions that we're doing, the techniques that we're doing.
The first one that we can use as a filter when we're asking ourselves questions and trying to solve problems. How are we taking care of the earth? So if we are purchasing something, for example, or we're designing a landscape, and there is a question that comes up like, well, is this actually good for the earth? That's number one. We want to make our choices from there. There's a lot of information out there, and I believe that we're now in the age of making choices, making ethical choices at that. And the second, which when we're talking about gardens doesn't really come into play a lot, but is really critical. So when you're making decisions, are you caring for people in that decision, whether it's 7 generations from now or whether it's yourself? And you have to start with yourself, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to take care of others. And if people can't take care of themselves, they're not going to do a very good job at taking care of the earth or being able to make those decisions because they have to meet their own needs first. And then there's the fair share is another ethic, so giving back. I consider that the altruism ethic.
So permaculture has its ethical dimension, and it's very important, but it is also a practical design system.
So as I mentioned, one of the biggest gifts that Bill and David gave us, arguably it's accredited to David Holmgren, is the permaculture principles and ethics. And this is really just the foundation of so much that we talk about in permaculture. There are 3 ethics, and there are 12 principles. And why I love the permaculture principles and ethics is that I can go back to them time and time again. No matter where I'm at in my career, I do a lot of consultation work, whether it's with homeowners or 500,000-acre farms, transitioning them to this more permanent basis of agriculture. I can always go back to the principles and get ideas and get inspiration. And ultimately, what the permaculture principles and ethics give us is this is a new language. This is a new operating system. So we're all starting to hear this word biomimicry a lot more. Starting to hear that a little bit more in your classes and things like that. How can we mimic nature? Well, I think that the permaculture principles and ethics are like this introductory handshake we can have with nature. And hey, nature, how you doing? Sorry we've been separate for a little while. How do we start speaking your language? How do we start to develop this lens where we can work with you and create systems that mimic how nature designs things? So that's what I think the permaculture principles and ethics give us. I'll go through the ethics. They are care of earth, care of people, and fair share. And the 12 permaculture principles, I won't go through all these, I'll just hit on some big ones. The first one is observe and interact, and that's just so huge. All my classes that I teach, we start with a nature awareness walk, and we spend time in the woods, and we go observe natural systems, because that's the blueprint. Everything that we need as humans can come from the way that nature designs things, and we can mimic that. Another big principle, the second one, is catch and store energy. So huge, whether we're talking about sunlight, water, temperature, wind. As humans, we can design environments that catch and store energy. I'll hit on a few more of these. Number 6, produce no waste. Huge in permaculture. We want to create closed loop, zero waste systems, just like a forest does. There's no such thing as garbage in nature. Number 10, use and value diversity. So huge. We talk about resilient systems a lot. A forest is very resilient. There's all kinds of different layers, whether we're talking about the canopy species that are up high, or shrubs down low, or the herbaceous layer, or even the mushrooms and fungi underneath. There's diversity there. And that's where the strength comes in. We can mimic that diversity in everything else that we do as humans. So, can't emphasize that enough. This is like the backbone of permaculture design, is these principles and ethics. You can go back to them anytime, no matter where you are, working on a design, doing something internally for yourself, trying to bring about some kind of change. These ethics and principles are nature's operating system, and we can learn them as students. That's the foundation.
We've arrived at the final element of the permaculture decision-making matrix, the permaculture design principles. Here are my 2 favorite books, which are the source of the principles. Bill Mollison included a comprehensive list of principles in the Permaculture Designer's Manual. And later on, David Holmgren consolidated and repackaged the principles into 12 in his book, Permaculture Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability. So for simplicity's sake, I'll present to you Holmgren's 12 principles. Principle 1 is observe and interact. Where am I? What are the forces present on my site that I need to design for? Climate, topography, water, soils, vegetation, wildlife, wind, fire, people. These are some of the elements that are part of our observations. Principle 2 is catch and store energy. Energy is not just electricity, but stored water represents potential energy in the form of irrigation water for future crops. The biomass of a forest represents a living storage of building materials, fuel, nutrients, and water. Alternative energy systems can turn wind, sun, and flowing water into electrical energy. So this principle gives us the directive to capture and grow surpluses in our system. Principle 3 is obtain a yield. This principle promotes self-reliance and gives us the directive to reap a harvest from our permaculture system, because you can't work on an empty stomach. This principle is relevant when making a choice about which tree to plant in a location. Always choose the one with greater and more diverse yields over an ornamental plant. Yields are not just food. Yields can be building materials, fuel wood, nectar for honey, but plenty of food growing all around you is true security. Principle 4 is apply self-regulation and accept feedback. This principle directs us to live simply and consciously, limit our own consumption, because no one else is going to do that for us. We need to keep our own consumption and emissions in check, because that is our responsibility when we care for Earth and care for people. Accepting feedback means that learning from our successes and mistakes is an imperative and should lead to better choices as we learn what works and what doesn't. Principle 5 is use and value renewable resources. Renewable resources are those which replenish with modest use. This could be sustainable forestry or fishing practices. This could mean planting an orchard downslope from a forest to take advantage of the nutrient and water drift that continually moves down the hill. This is the wind. This is the fact that plants and animals breed, and if we're responsible and careful, many of these resources can provide in perpetuity. The next principle, number 6, is produce no waste. This is where we make the waste of one part of our system the food for another. This means we compost, clean and recycle gray water, repair and repurpose broken tools and equipment, reduce, reuse, repair, recycle. This also means we don't waste people by having them do hazardous and meaningless work. Principle 7 is design from patterns to details. This is one of my personal favorites. It means that first we study the climate, topography, watershed, ecology, and we get a big picture vision of how we can interact with the land and community in a regenerative way. And then our design decisions are based on that. So this road I just drew in is placed in a way where it harvests the water for this pond. The detail of road placement was based on the overall pattern of water flow in the landscape. Principle 8 is integrate rather than segregate. This principle says that the more relationships between parts of your systems, the stronger, more productive, and more resilient your system becomes. This has to do with community as well. I drew a cluster of dwellings where a cooperative community can get much more done than an individual. Many hands make light work. Principle 9 is use small and slow solutions. I've gone ahead and harvested some of the trees on the forest edge to use for fence posts and replace them with nut trees that will start bearing in about 10 to 12 years. And will then live for hundreds of years. I've planted new trees over here, which will be new fence posts when these ones rot. I've also inoculated edible mushrooms into the stumps of the trees I cut, which will produce for years and then spread to others with the fallen wood. These are all examples of playing the long game using the small and slow design principle. Principle 10 is use and value diversity. You can see we've got housing, gardens, wind power, water storage, composting, gray water, forestry, orchards, and now I've added in rotational grazing of animals. Both here and in the orchard. I've also added more trees and gardens around the homestead and fish to the pond. Diversity is one of the key aspects of permaculture. We want to conserve diverse native habitats and make our human habitats rich with an abundance of many productive elements. Diversity is also resilience. If one part of our system fails, there are others that will thrive. Principle 11 is use edges and value the marginal. I've added edible hedgerows around the animal paddocks and along the road. I've also added bamboo down below the pond, which will be sub-irrigated by water that seeps down. The edges and margins are great locations to add more productive species or habitat zones, and I can use them to create further layers of productivity. Principle 12 is creatively use and respond to change. I noticed that with the orchards and hedgerows growing in, the forest soils growing spongier from the mushroom inoculation, and the soils building from the animal rotation, water has begun to move much more slowly down the hillside. So much so that this area at the bottom of the hill is becoming somewhat of a marsh. Well, that wasn't what I planned, but I'm going to creatively use that change, and I'm going to carve out some low areas that'll stay really wet, which I can use to grow edible wetland plants, and then simultaneously build up these peninsulas full of edge to grow productive trees which will get their roots down in this water table. Wow, I didn't even see that yield coming, but there you have it. The permaculture principles in action.
Permaculture design, just finished up my course. Wanna take it home, take the world on a tour de force of fruits and trees, flowers and bees, sprouts and seeds, enough for you and me. First come the earth, yeah, you got to take care of it. Then come the people, then each his fair share of it. Design for the earth and you design for yourself. Help design a world better for you and everybody else. Yeah, principle 1, observe and interact, or you won't get far, man, that is just a fact. Principle 2, capture and store energy, put the water in the ground instead of washing out the sea. Principle 3, is often so tasty. It's obtain a yield no matter what you grow. It got to eat, to work, to live, to make it worth all the hoeing. Principle 4, keep you on track, self-regulate and accept feedback. By that I mean you got to know that things change. Don't be afraid to learn from nature's ways. Because first come the earth, yeah, you got to take care of it. Then come the people and each is fair share of it. Design for the earth and you design for yourself. Help design a world better for you and everybody else. Principle 5, it's better to be renewable. Hydroelectric, solar power, it's super doable. You don't need a tractor if you got a horse. If you got 2 hands, you don't need brute force. Principle 6, waste is an illusion. Nature recycles all while we waste time in confusion. Principle 7, design for patterns to details. Nature got the answer from the spiral to the sweet swell. Principle 8, integrate. Each element multifunctional. Each function support the just in case. Because first come the earth, yeah, you got to take care of it. Then come the people, then each is fair share of it. Design for the earth and you design for yourself. Help design a world better for you and everybody else. 4 more principles to go, here we go. Principle 9, keep it small, take it slow. Get the most for the least, you got to go with the flow, yo. Principle 10, value diversity. 1 basket too small for all the eggs you're gonna need. Principle 11's all about the edges. Value the margin, less row, more hedges. Principle 12, get creative with change. Each an opportunity to grow and rearrange. First come the earth, yeah, you got to take care of it. Then come the people, then each is fair share of it. Design for the earth and you design for yourself. Help design a world better for you and everybody else. Everybody else.